Hey guys! Welcome back to Fables Dan, and this is Kim. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the extremely awkward topic of race and discrimination and social justice and white supremacy. So obviously what prompted this video was what happened in Charlottesville, but I'm not really here to comment on that since, I guess just a disclaimer, just so you know, I'm not here to make a political statement. This is not a political video. This is just kind of my musings and my perspective on race. I guess my experience as a person of color growing up in Canada, and also just some of my perspectives on how we can go about it, kind of how to really confront this really awkward topic and sometimes damaging conversation. Like, sometimes it gets really toxic, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, so not really here to make a political comment, so don't worry, this is not going to be a political rant. I'm unfit to comment on politics anyway, just because I'm so under-informed. Personally, I'm not really interested in politics, and I just don't know enough to really comment on identity politics. So just a disclaimer. Okay, so basically what my social media was flooded with stuff about race, about equality, about multiculturalism, about condemning hate crime and hate speech and white supremacy and that kind of stuff. So one of the videos that kind of got me into this spiral of this journey of reflecting on what I thought about race was I saw this one video, and it was called A Dinner with a White Nationalist. And basically this Asian dude, I'm not sure what his name is, I need to look it up. This Asian person invited a white nationalist to come have dinner with him in his restaurant, and then they proceed to have a discussion about race. And I understand what the video was trying to achieve, but I really disliked that video, even though it was about equality, and even though some of the views from that white nationalist was really uncomfortable and really disturbing, and it was a perspective based on separation and judgment. So, but having that said, as much as I disagreed with his views, as much as I agree with equality and multiculturalism and fairness and that kind of stuff, I was really bothered by the format of that video, because it wasn't a discussion, it wasn't a conversation. It was this Asian person inviting a white nationalist, and then just proceeded to interrupt him, truth bomb him, just trying to prove him wrong. And I just find I didn't really like that. I just feel like, okay, I feel like not every person who claims to be a white nationalist is like a psychopath holding a crossbow, trying to hunt down people of color in the woods. That's a different issue. When there's violence, the only answer to violence is justice. But that's on the extreme side, right? So I kind of want to focus on just everyday conversations, just having conversations with people who might disagree with you and people who might have problematic views. So yeah, I saw that video, and I was just like, I didn't really like the format, like I said, because I just feel like it's just as problematic and just as unproductive and unconstructive to invite somebody with problematic views and then just try to attack them, try to prove them wrong, and try to fact check them, try to truth bomb them, and try to just politely and intellectually and just kind of just try to bring them down, trying to prove that their perspective is wrong. Okay, so the reason why I'm really uncomfortable with it is just when you do that, when you sort of reach out to somebody, when you try to have a conversation or discussion with somebody, even with problematic views, when you're just trying to prove them wrong, it's not really a discussion. It's just a scream fest, and it's just people screaming at each other, trying to prove each other right, trying to prove the other person wrong, and it doesn't serve anybody, it doesn't serve humanity. It's just more rage, more bad vibes, and just doesn't really solve the problem. And I think this is something I gradually started to feel just over the course of the past 2-3 years. I remember when I was in university, I studied feminism, I studied gender equality, and I was really passionate about those topics. I believe that gender and race and that kind of stuff, these things are constructions within our identity, placed upon us by our society and by the way our society is structured, and they can be dismantled, they can be questioned, and it's all about trying to unwind these influences in your identity and trying to break free, trying to live authentically, trying to cultivate a perspective that's fair, that's about inclusion, that's about like that's about connecting with each other as human beings and respecting each other, understanding each other as human beings. So I was really passionate about feminism, and I feel like when I was in academia, one of the pitfalls I fell into was kind of falling into this "you're wrong, I'm right" sentiment, and I feel like this is true for a lot of for a lot of these so-called social justice warriors, especially when things like when these gender wars or race wars are happening on the internet. It's just a big scream fest. I remember when Trump was first president, it was just so much screaming at each other. I was like, it was toxic. Like, I was just did not want to be on Facebook because of that kind of dynamic. It was just people spitting at each other, fighting, raging over stupid stuff, and then it was just tiring. And that is not the way to for humanity to progress. I know that it's easier to side with somebody whose views are championing equality and multiculturalism and gender equality and that kind of stuff, but if you're screaming, if you're just trying to prove the other person wrong, you're not really helping you're not really helping to solve the problems either, because you're just screaming. You're also doing the same thing. You're also judging somebody based on their views. And sure, their views could be problematic, but those views don't represent all of them. Those views are an aspect of them, if that makes sense. And I know that it's almost scary or disturbing to kind of to want to try to negate or just kind of look at the fact that, okay, this person may be racist and sexist, but can this person still be a good person? Like all those kind of things that sort of just I thought about. And I was kind of in that mentality. Like I said, I was sort of in this sort of battle mode where I want to see something and I just want to prove them wrong. I just want to prove that I'm right. I just want to prove that I have the right views. And then because, I'm championing justice and social justice and freedom and identity and that kind of stuff. So I desperately wanted to kind of just prove that. And after I graduated university, I was away from academia a little bit, and I found that slowly I sort of distanced myself from that kind of mentality where I need to find something to argue about so I can be right. And I find that that's a lot of our perspectives when it comes to attitudes, I think, about social justice. It's about proving the other person wrong. It's about like racism is wrong, hate crime is wrong, hate speech is wrong, discrimination is wrong. Therefore, you are wrong, you're a bad person, you're evil, you're associated with like just scum, shit, whatever. You're just on the other side of the spectrum and you don't deserve to live, or stuff like that. Equally toxic attitude, and like I said, doesn't solve any problems. Okay, so back to that video. So like I said, over the years I developed this sort of more neutral, kind of more, no, I wouldn't say distant, but more like laid back perspective on social justice or gender or race. Because I just feel like, depending on who you are, if you're somebody who is actually, if you're an activist, if going to marches or doing social justice work is like part of who you are, it's part of your identity, it's part of something that kind of, it's your calling, right? It's something that makes you feel passionate. You should pursue those things. You should work on making the world a better place in your own way, in a way that reflects who you are as a person. But for a lot of regular people like us, I guess, or like me, I know that for sure I'm not really interested in going to marches. I'm not really interested in like that kind of activism, the like the really visible external kind of activism. I know that's it's not really my thing. Like, I support it, obviously. I support the views that they're trying to promote, but it's just not something that I feel would bring me personal enjoyment if I participate in those things. Instead, I try to make the world a better place in my own way, in a way that reflects my identity, in a way that reflects my spirit's calling. So for people like us, for people who are just kind of like day to day, like have a 9 to 5 job or just have a family, kind of just not really at the front lines of those identity politics, I feel like what it comes down to isn't about proving the other person wrong. Isn't about like, you're racist, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. It's more about like compassion, you know? It's about trying to understand the other person's view. Like that video I watched, the one about the white nationalist having a dinner with this Asian person. And then the reason why he was afraid of white, what was that term? White dispossession, the dispossession of white people. Basically, a concept that basically said that it's this fear of disappearing. It's this fear of like white people what might become the minority or might become extinct if the people in America, if America continues to allow immigrants or people of color to come into their country and to take over white people. Because on the grand scheme of things globally, there wouldn't be any country that would have a white majority anymore. That kind of stuff. So when I heard that, I mean, it's really uncomfortable, obviously, especially for me because I'm a person of color, I'm Asian, and it was uncomfortable, but I just feel like he was talking about fear, and fear is fundamentally human. And that's something I can, even though I disagree with that kind of view, I could sympathize with fear. I could sympathize with the fear of disappearing because that's how I felt as an immigrant. When I first immigrated to Canada, I feared disappearing into white culture, I guess. So it's kind of the other way around. I was afraid that I would lose myself. I would be rejected by mainstream society. I would be too Asian, or if I'm around Asian people, I might be too white or too Canadian. So I think this is probably something that a lot of immigrants would go through, is this identity struggle. Like, are you part of the mainstream? Are you part of like your heritage culture? Like, which side are you on? Are you have and have? And obviously identity can't really be halved. It can't be represented by numbers or fractions, or, it's just a silly idea. But I did feel that when I first immigrated here. Like, and I was afraid. So because of that, I would only hang out with Asian people. And that wasn't because I was racist towards white people. It was just because I was scared of being rejected. And especially for me, because I was an ESL student, English was my second language. I didn't really speak English that fluently in the first 2 years of my life. And plus, I was super shy and introverted and insecure. So everything just added up to like, okay, let me just stay in my comfort zone. Let me just hang out with Asian people because it's easier, because they're my people and they're comfortable to hang out with because I don't have to speak English as much. I could just speak Chinese. And I could, and on the other hand, on the other side, I guess, if you're a white person, if you have that fear of disappearing into this plethora of multiculturalism, disappearing into skin color, I think like me, that fear is misplaced. It's because for me, like, I grew up really without experiencing any sort of really violent or like racism or bullying. Like, I grew up with really friendly people, just just everybody was treated everybody with respect. It was pretty ideal. I mean, I did experience some minor bullying, but I had a lot of support from my classmates, from my friends and my teachers. So that was never really an issue. So I grew up relatively, like, I never, like, being Asian was never made into a thing for me. Like, nobody ever made me feel like I was Asian or I was too Asian, therefore I didn't belong. So that didn't happen. But I still had that fear, right? Just because you would internalize the mainstream culture, you would internalize that the main group of people in Canada would be white people or people like white people. So you would internalize that fear of not wanting to, or I guess mine is like a reverse fear. My fear was not wanting to become part of that group, but also afraid of, like, fearing rejection from that group. And this sort of mentality of separation, that we're separate, that we're different groups of people, it was because, I mean, sure, it's true that our society is set up in a way that sort of have these kind of segregations, and like, it does exist, like racism does exist, but that fear of assuming that this was always the case, that fear of just making that assumption, it was my own fear, it was my insecurity, and I had that insecurity because I didn't speak English well at the time, and I was also very shy, didn't have a lot of confidence. It was more about how I felt as a person and the issues that I had as a person. And those fears and insecurities became projected onto the things that are kind of easy to latch onto. For example, the things you can see, race or gender. And that fear and insecurity, like fear and rejection. Like if I were just, to give you an example, if I was born in Taiwan, I stayed in Taiwan, I would still have the same fear and rejection, but it wouldn't be placed upon the majority it wouldn't be placed upon white people. It would just be placed upon maybe other peers who appear to have a different kind of characteristic than me. Maybe like the popular kids, or maybe you know what I mean. Like it would just be I would just kind of create that different group in my mind to sort of project my insecurity onto them. So same thing, and I guess in North America, because it's so multicultural, people from all over the world reside in North America. So it's easy to have that fear come out of you and just latch onto something that's immediately visible, and in this case, race. And it's so easy to fall into that. It's a downward spiral. It's just quicksand, you know? So racism really isn't about learning or unlearning, like confronting racism or trying to sort of promote equality, like just social justice or racial equality or whatever. It's not about it's not about it's not about unlearning that perspective. It's not about like trying to educate those people. It's not about trying to prove that those people wrong. It's not about trying to like chop up those problematic views and just hope that they see logic in those things. If logic ruled our brain, like even just 50% of the time, the world would be a much better place already. Like it's not a logical thing. It's not an ideological or logical war. It's an emotional one. Because racism is not a logical choice. It's not logical, right? If just any racist person just would you if you could reason with them, if you could reason with someone who's so deep into their entrenched in their views with logic, there would be no racism, because logically speaking, coming together as a group of people, recognizing the humanity in each other, connecting with each other and trying to understand each other, having compassion for each other, they all sound very logical. And if logic could solve racism and sexism and whatever isms, then there would be no racism or sexism or whatever ism, because it's not a logical issue. Racism is not logical. So you can't ask them to unlearn their views. You can't ask them to you can't ask those people to recognize that they're wrong, because racism is based in fear. It's based in their insecurity, which they would project onto. It's a way of them gaining superiority over something that they perceive to be inferior. It's fear latching onto the world around them. It's their fear being projected onto the world around them. So it's an emotional issue, and facing an emotional issue, it's more about doing stuff it's more about recognizing yourself. It's more about digging deeper into yourself. It's about trying to connect with yourself. It's about recognizing your feelings. It's about recognizing your fears. Why are you afraid? Maybe for white nationalists, why are you afraid of disappearing into multiculturalism? Why would that be damaging? Like, what's your worst fear? And maybe for immigrants, for people of color, why would you fear rejection? Like, other than the real racist things that happen. Like, unfortunately, it's a problem within many societies. But why are you afraid? Like, it's about looking at yourself in the mirror and trying to work through the issues within yourself, looking at your own experience in the context of the bigger picture. It's about doing work to become a better person, not trying to out-argue or not trying to be proven right or wrong in this identity politics. It's not about that. I feel like we can't solve problems if we're just trying to point fingers. It's about for people who are ready for change, for people who are questioning their views maybe, then those people are like, they're inviting change and they're ready for change. It just like it doesn't have to be racism or sexism. You know, like, say like if you have a friend who's in a toxic relationship and everybody is telling her to dump the guy, but she wouldn't see it until she sees it. It's the same thing. It's like people are not ready for change unless they want change, unless they're ready for change. So my point is, sorry, this is a big spiral. So my point is, what it comes down to is the individual. And I know it sounds impossible because how can we solve problems if it's just about waiting for them to make that realization? So I feel like for a lot of people, it could be a racist perspective, could be a religious perspective. I'm sure if you do tarot, you would have encountered, maybe some of you would have encountered like people who think tarot is like associated with a devil or something. It's the same thing. They don't like, they're not going to change if they don't want to change. Like, it's practically a cult. It's practically a cult, and then they're just trying to gain more followers. They don't really care about the well-being of other people. And they could be talking about like God or angels or a better nation or like patriotism. It's just their way of trying to brainwash people. It's practically a cult, but that's another video. My point is, when it comes to day-to-day life, a point I was trying to make like 10 minutes ago, when it comes to day-to-day life, when it comes to just people, when it comes to the people you meet, when it comes to like, it's just about it's just about trying to be in a relationship with somebody and trying to have that respect for somebody, just respecting each other. It's like, for example, if someone makes you uncomfortable, so if maybe for a person of color it's about facing stereotypes, and maybe for a lot of white people it's about constantly being maybe just unfairly antagonized as racist or as white supremacist. So I think within those two views, there's an area where we are awkward. Like, we don't really know how to be with each other. Like, it's kind of like meeting for the first time, because it's about cultivating a better relationship with each other. And unfortunately, it's not. I mean, I wish that it'll just be one big human happy family, and then I can just go out and face any white person, Asian person, brown person, whatever, and just be like, hey, I don't see your skin color, I just see you as who you are. I mean, I wish the society is like that. But I think because race is a very real thing, and because racism exists, there's that really awkward area where we don't really know how to be with each other. And I think we don't need to bring gender politics or race politics or identity politics into this. We don't need to be equipped ourselves with arguments or facts about how you should behave, or check your privilege, or stop antagonizing me, or that kind of stuff. It's more just about like, say if somebody tried to stereotype me, I'll just be like, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, let's talk about something else. I don't need to bitch about it. I can, I can set my boundaries, but I don't need to bitch about it. And the other person could be like, oh, I'm sorry about that, well, let's talk about something else. And the next time you would know what to talk about and what not to talk about. Like, why do people make it so complicated? It's just about, in a relationship, you try to problem solve, you try to listen to each other, you have compassion for each other. And when it comes down to that awkward space, it's just trying to communicate your needs and your boundaries to the other person, and try not to be a bitch or a jerk. Like, how hard is that? I just feel like identity politics gets so complicated sometimes. It's like, it doesn't have to be that awkward. It just has to be like, okay, just treat the other person as a human person, as in like, just race and sexism aside. It's just about, okay, what am I doing that I'm kind of making you feel uncomfortable, that I was not aware of? And okay, I get that now because you told me. So I won't do it again, because any decent person would try to, keep some ego involved. Somebody could get angry or defensive, but I think ultimately, if that person, if whatever you're dealing with, and yourself, including yourself, if you make the decision to be, okay, I hear this person, I hear ya, I shouldn't be making these assumptions, and that was kind of awkward. It was really awkward, and I guess it was rude of me to do that. And then you just change. You just try to navigate that relationship with information given by the other person, with the feedback that's given by the other person. Like, why make it so complicated, And this is why I just feel like, just, if you ever feel awkward, if you're like, you know, it doesn't matter if you're like a person of color, if you're a white person, if you're ever in an awkward situation, or just maybe in a really racially charged situation, just be honest and polite and try to listen to the other person and set boundaries for both for yourself and for like set boundaries and try to not like play by ear. That's what I want to say. Like try to navigate through that conversation or encounter to the best of your ability and just problem solve the issues in your relationship with this person. Could be a friend or best friend or just a stranger that you meet. It doesn't have to be complicated. And I think we're all obligated to want to try to understand each other, to want to try to have compassion for each other and listen to what each other has to say. Otherwise, we'll just be screaming at each other anyway, which is what a lot of people have been doing, what we've been doing a lot for hundreds of years, and or maybe thousands of years. And that personally, I think that's how humanity, if you will, can progress. And yeah, of course, you know, this isn't like the ideal solution for everything. This is not the solution for everything. It depends on the situation, right? Like I said before, if it involves violence, if it involves like attacking another person, hurting and damaging another person, that's a different story. That's not just about communication anymore. That's violence. The only thing you answer violence with justice. Like if you're, you know, like stuff like what happened at Charlottesville, like crashing a car into an innocent crowd of people. It's just violence. You know, whatever perspectives were behind it could be racism, could be sexism, could be just that person is a psychopath or that person hated society, whatever it is. It's violence, and it's an injustice that needs to be met with justice and law. So that's my view on, you know, those kind of issues. But when it comes to really like making changes that are immediate and changes that are meaningful for people who are not at the front lines, I guess, like for someone like me, it's just about trying to make space for each other, trying to listen to each other, trying to have compassion for each other, and understanding that sometimes we might say the wrong things, sometimes we might assume too much or too little, sometimes we might be in a position where it's kind of awkward and weird and really outside of a comfort zone. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. That doesn't mean that we should just shut down and just be like, oh, it's easier to be with my kind of people. You don't have to force yourself to like have not, like X number, like amount of friends to prove that you're not racist or you're not sexist or whatever, or to prove that you're multicultural. You don't have to try to make a statement. You just kind of look at within your sphere of influence, within the people that you love and care about, how can you be a better listener? How can you have more compassion for each other? And that's kind of what I strive to live by, you know? Like whatever it is, whatever that happens when I have an argument, or, well, I rarely have arguments now because it's not really my scene, but when I encounter perspectives that really differ from me, when I encounter perspectives that are really problematic, I always do my best and try to make an effort to listen first. Because, you know, if you're having a conversation and you're just trying to speak without really trying to address the other party, then it's just you wanting to hear your own voice. So there's that. So for me, I try to always listen first, and I try my best to have compassion for people, and I try my best to look at things in a really fair way and try to understand that there's the area of awkwardness, but when it gets too much, that's a completely different issue entirely. Okay, I think I'm running out of wind. Sort of that's, you know, like sometimes you have like things you want to say, and it's like kind of like a little block of speech, and it just runs through your brain and it comes out, and then when it gets to the end, you just start rambling because you're basically done talking. Anyway, so that's how I feel right now. I think I've said everything that I want to say so far about race and how we can make the world a better place. I don't know. Yeah, to close, I would like to quote Zootopia because it's one of my favorite animated films ever. Really, really great film, even though it's a cartoon. Kind of tackling the issues of race, separation, assumptions, and that kind of stuff in society, and it's cleverly portrayed in a cartoon for kids. So I strongly recommend that film. It's really uplifting, it's really poignant when it comes to the social commentary, it's really cute. So I'm going to quote Zootopia. So the movie ended was with a speech by this little bunny, and she said, doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, real life is messy, and everybody makes mistakes, and which means glass half full. We're all human. We're all in this boat together. So I implore you, try to make the world a better place. Change starts with you, and it starts with me. It starts with all of us. So there you go. Until next time, keep calm and tarot on, and I hope this video has given you some thoughts, and I would love to hear about what you think in the comments below. And yeah, until next time, be the hero of your own story, keep calm and tarot on, and I will see you in the next video.